This evening's webinar, Philanthropy in Action During COVID-19, Small Businesses, Vulnerable Populations, and Innovation. Thank you so much for joining us. Tonight's discussion is co-hosted by Accelerate Yale and the Yale Alumni Nonprofit Alliance, YANA, and made possible by the YAA's shared interest groups. My name is Hsieh, Yale College class of 2007, and I'm a co-founder of Accelerate Yale and a board member of YANA. Accelerate Yale is a global community of alumni and friends of Yale who are engaged in innovation, tech, and entrepreneurship. YANA's mission is to connect and catalyze for global good, and we envision a global community that engages all alumni and friends of Yale in advancing social change. The current estimate is that 2 out of 3 Yalees are involved in social impact, whether it's serving as board members, full-time practitioners, volunteers, or donors, representing a population of over 110,000 alumni around the world. Please note that we are being recorded this evening with all participants muted. Tonight's session will be 1 hour, and we will reserve the final 25 minutes for your questions. If you have a question that you would like to submit to our panelists, please do so via the Q&A button on the bottom bar of your screen. And now, I have the pleasure of introducing our featured speakers for this evening, both of whom I'm honored to call friends. Ken Inadomi, class of 76, is the founding chair of YANA. He currently serves as the executive director of NY PACE, New York Professional Advisors for Community Entrepreneurs, a nonprofit that provides pro bono consulting to entrepreneurs operating in underserved, under-resourced communities of New York City. Ken was awarded the Yale Medal in 2017. Lenore Estrada, class of 2005, is the founder and executive director of SF New Deal, which is paying San Francisco restaurants and their workers to make and deliver meals to San Francisco's most vulnerable residents during the COVID-19 crisis. Since launching on March 23rd, SF New Deal has delivered over 130,000 meals and has dispersed nearly $1.5 million directly to small businesses to keep their doors open and their workers employed. Lenore is also the co-founder and owner of Three Babes Bakeshop, a women and minority-owned bakery business located in San Francisco that is committed to supporting and promoting local and organic farming. Since the company launched as a pop-up business in 2011, Three Babes Pies have been honored among the best pies in America by news outlets, including Food and Wine Magazine, Travel and Leisure, The Cooking Channel, The Today Show, and NPR. Lenore is passionate about community engagement, the alleviation of poverty, supporting small business owners, and entrepreneurship more broadly. She made headlines last year after taking a stand against Munchery, a venture-backed startup that closed without paying its small local vendors. Lenore is originally from California's Central Valley and is one of 7 children. And now I have the pleasure of handing over the floor to Ken and Lenore. Welcome.
Grace, thank you so much for your generous introduction. And Lenore, it's great to be on the same podium with you, so to speak. But first, I want to give a shout out to both Grace and to her colleague at Accelerate Yale, Wendy Maldonado de Amico. What they've done with Accelerate Yale, when you talk about acceleration, I think they've taken essentially a startup alumni organization from 0 to 60 in record speed. So a hat tip to you both and your other colleagues. I know James Murphy is also part of it, for what you've been able to do in such a short amount of time. You know, a lot's been talked about the pandemic, and a lot of it has been negative, but tonight we have a really inspiring story. What Lenore has done in the Bay Area so quickly, you talk about Accelerate, what she's done so quickly and how she's been able to mobilize, it really is one of the shining stories of this crisis. And the fact that she's part of the Yale community, let's face it, it makes it that much sweeter. So Lenore, please, it was great to get to know you yesterday. Let's just hand it over to you. If you can just tell us a little bit about Three Babes and how that evolved into SF New Deal in light of the pandemic. It's just a fascinating story. Why don't you give us the overview and then we'll do a drill down, please.
Thanks so much for having me, Ken, and thanks, Grace, for the generous introduction. My name's Lenore. I am Yale class of 2005, And normally I run a bake shop that I founded that specializes in pies. We started, gosh, almost 9 years ago, I guess, 9 years ago this month. And we started with $0. So we actually raised $10,000 on Kickstarter, and we started a pop-up business originally. And then we just built that very slowly into something more sustainable. And as of beginning of March, we had 26 employees. Most of what we were doing was delivering breakfast, pastries, and desserts to large corporate kind of dining rooms here in San Francisco. So Google, Lyft, Twitch, companies like that were our clients. And at the beginning of March, I guess at the end of February, really, we started seeing a slowdown in orders. So it became apparent that something was going on. And actually, because of my sort of network of friends from Yale, I kind of had access to a number of tech CEOs who are from my own class or classes directly above or below mine at Yale. And they sort of knew already that the tech companies were planning to just shut down here even before the shelter in place order was happening. So the tech companies in the Bay Area really took leadership in just telling everyone to work from home weeks before the rest of San Francisco decided to start sheltering in place. And that, I think, was really an important leadership moment and really saved a lot of lives here in San Francisco and just flattened the curve much earlier and helped us to just not feel so many of the terrible effects of COVID that we're seeing in some other communities around the country. And so for me, that meant, though, that I was losing 85% of my business, and it would probably be gone for between 1 and 6 months, maybe even longer at this point we're looking at. But at the time I was thinking 1 to 3 months. And so that meant for me, if I was losing 90% of my revenue, there was just no way for me to keep staff. And I knew I had to lay people off. And that was devastating. I mean, we are employing people who are supporting families, and we had to cut people who lost benefits. And so it was a very tough week of work. I would say harder than even when my parents passed away 7 years ago, but just having to tell everyone that, that they were losing their jobs, they didn't know when I could hire them back, that they were going to lose benefits. These were very, very difficult conversations. About a week later, the shelter in place order for all of San Francisco came through, and I knew that other small businesses and my friends in the small business community were about to have to start doing the same things that I had just done. And luckily, Hsieh, who is also a Yale alum, he was Yale 2005 in Davenport, he reached out and he founded Twitch, which sold to Amazon 5 years ago, I guess. And he was interested in trying to help small businesses kind of weather the storm, and was interested in sort of immediately putting money to work to make that happen. And so he proposed that if I was willing to run an effort to sort of help small businesses persevere, that he was willing to put in the first $1 million. And so that was kind of how SF New Deal was born. It moved very quickly. We went from talking about the idea to delivering the first meals within 5 days. And in that time, we launched a website, we established a nonprofit, we started making partnerships with various restaurants and community partners who would be on the receiving end of meals. But basically, I realized that with this access to money, I could actually make a much bigger impact than just trying to sort of work on my own small business. So I handed over the reins of my company to my director of operations, and Three Babes is running at a much reduced capacity. And then I'm full-time volunteering as the executive director of SF New Deal. The first week, which was March 23rd, we delivered 1,000 meals. The second week, we had scaled up to 18,000 meals. And then after that, it was 23,000, 25,000. Pretty much every week since then, it's been between 19,000 and 30,000 meals. And we're in our 8th week of serving meals that are almost all privately funded. FEMA dollars and state dollars have not yet flowed through down to the small business level or even the meal relief level for most people. And so the people we're serving, it's been over 150,000 meals at this point. They are not receiving meals in most cases from anyone else. And the single meal we are delivering is the only meal they are receiving each day. The restaurants that we've been working with have been able to rehire staff in many cases, or like keep staff on while they're waiting for PPP. So we definitely have been really proud of what we've accomplished, but it's certainly been a group effort. It's taken, we have 35 volunteers, and many of us are committing ourselves 40 to 60 hours a week just to make this happen.
It's phenomenal. Lenore, being a nonprofit myself, one of the things I realize is that when you can leverage corporate philanthropy with volunteer engagement, incredible things can happen. And what you've been able to do, mobilizing, I think you said that from your envisioning to your first meal served, it was only 5 days. That's just an incredible collapse of time. One of the things I've always said is that a Yale education trains you for nothing, but prepares you for everything, because it teaches you how to solve problems, work collaboratively, and express yourself articulately. And it shows that you put all three of those into play very quickly. I'm really interested in the collaborative piece of it, how you were able to get your volunteer corps, the restaurants on board. How did you cobble all that together so quickly?
Well, I do think actually it's a combination of things. The things that were truly necessary, I would say, are the money up front. The fact that Emmett committed that money opened so many doors for us. So it was very important to have resources who could actually make decisions and act. Without that, we're sort of, previously for a couple of weeks, we'd kind of been asking around like, hey, if I found private monies for pies somehow, would you have someone that could eat those pies? And so when it's more of a theoretical conversation, it's harder to get people's attention and be taken seriously. As soon as we had that money from Emmett, I mean, a lot of opportunities opened up to work with the city of San Francisco and to work with community partners. The other part of the equation that is equally important, perhaps more important really for us, has been sort of forging these relationships with community partners. So the community-based organizations that we are working with are groups that have been serving the community for like decades. In the case of, we're working with a group of Black churches, and in their case, many of them have been serving for over 100 years, the people who are in their communities, and helping them to get food and other resources. And so for a lot of the people who are most vulnerable for contracting COVID-19, they're typically communities of color. They're oftentimes people who don't have access to income. They have no way to really shelter in place unless they're being given food aid, because they don't have a way to eat. So how are you going to shelter in place if you have no food? But a lot of times, especially among people who are recent immigrants, there's not necessarily a trust of going to government to try to ask for assistance. And people don't necessarily trust or have access to resources. And so these community partners who have trusted relationships because of years of service, they were the key to really getting in there and immediately being able to effectively distribute aid. So we're finding that we're able to much more quickly and effectively and affordably get resources to people, because we're working with partners that already have relationships, as opposed to trying to pay some outsider to kind of figure out who needs food and get it to them, or even to pay the government. The public servants who we've been working with are very committed to the cause of trying to help the community, but a lot of times they actually just don't have direct knowledge of who it is that needs food or services in general, and where exactly to find them. So they kind of might know broadly that in a certain community, people tend to have fewer access to resources, or even in a certain public housing complex that some people need food, but they have no idea, no way to sort of specifically determine who needs that food or what their specific address is, which seems crazy, but is the reality here. So talking to a pastor at a Black church, that person actually has much more knowledge about who in the congregation actually needs help and how to get them, and they have their cell phone number ready. So that was a real key in just getting in on the community partner side. With the restaurants, that was, I would say, less of a challenge just because of my background in the restaurant industry. So there are a lot of chefs here, and I'm sure in New York as well and other places, who have come together around other emergencies in the past. So here in the past few years, we've had wildfires in Northern California. And so there was a group of chefs who already had worked together a lot to respond to that crisis. And so we just sort of got the band back together and started with that, and then went into especially communities that have fewer access, like less access to resources. They sort of don't necessarily have established banking relationships. They don't have sophisticated investors. The second group of restaurants that we really tried to bring on board were those types of places that tend to be much smaller, mom and pops or newly established restaurants. they were kind of the second group that we brought on board. And then we immediately had a wait list of over 100 people, just from restaurants hearing about what we were doing and wanting to sign up. So one of our big challenges has just been fundraising enough to meet the need for both meals and supporting our businesses. The money that Emmett committed is long spent. So even though we're providing meals very efficiently and have no overhead, it still gets expensive to hand out 20,000 meals a week.
Right. You know, and what you're doing, what SFU Deal is doing, I know you're focusing on restaurants now, but I think there's in the greater game plan, it could permeate into other businesses. But what you're doing is so important, because everything that I understand about business is that once you close down, it's very hard to open back up. So if we can sustain these restaurants, at least even at the minimal level, then their chances for surviving, riding out the pandemic, and then being prepared for recovery is that much greater. I think it's really amazing how, as a social entrepreneur, you were able to read a situation. After all, the community-based organizations, they're right there in the neighborhoods. And as you said, you know, they know where the pieces are. But you were able to come in and do what really they could not do. I think you were able to look at it with fresh eyes. And as an entrepreneur and a social entrepreneur, do you think, how do you see coming in as, quote, an outsider and assessing a situation and then taking the appropriate steps? Do you feel that was an advantage?
Well, I think actually I don't like to think of myself as an outsider so much as kind of a supporter. So there have been a couple of organizations that have definitely sort of like swooped in from the outside and taken that tack. And that's really not what we're trying to do here. I consider us much more like a grassroots organization. So what I'm trying to do is meet people where they are. So yes, I am coming from the outside, but honestly, the most valuable thing I'm providing as an outsider is money, right? I have access to people who have money, and I have access to people who have influence in government. And so kind of pressing on all of those levers is what I'm bringing in. And then what the community partners are giving me is those relationships they already have. And so I'm just kind of like springboarding off of the foundation that they've spent years establishing. So yeah, we definitely want to not engage in like thinking about having a savior complex, and more in like engaging with these people as our neighbors and thinking of our community as a united group that should be coming together to work out problems collectively, not about sort of just providing assistance. So I do agree with your earlier point about helping people before things get really dire. Like in all of the social justice work I've done, and in business too, I mean, it's so much easier and more cost effective in terms of all kinds of resources, money, time, effectiveness, to assist someone who is still pretty much able to help themselves, but just needs like a little boost. They need assistance making their rent payments so they don't get evicted. They need help fixing their car windows so they can keep driving for Uber. It's much easier to help someone like that than someone who is chronically homeless, who's just sort of suffered for years with no resources and has already kind of lost much of their own ability to fight. And I see our small businesses much in the same way. Like it's a much better investment to sort of assist people immediately than it is to wait 9 months and then try to bring back our business community. So a big focus of what I was doing is just wanting to get in there immediately, because we knew it was going to be many weeks before any government funding came. And that definitely bore out. Like in the first tranche of PPP funding, I think out of the 150 restaurants on our wait list and in our active pool, 3 people got PPP. 3 out of 150. That's crazy. And then in the second tranche, I think around 60% have gotten it so far. So, and that was, I mean, when my business received PPP, we'd already been providing meals and money to the small businesses within SFU Deal for 7 weeks. And so no restaurant has 7 weeks of payroll saved up. It's just like not a thing. And so we sort of knew that, and our goal was to sort of bridge people until government support came. And then it turns out government support was even longer than the sort of long timeline we had anticipated.
Right. one of the things we found, and I know it's probably the same in California as it is in New York, but the pandemic has disproportionately negatively impacted people of color more than not. But in the restaurant business, everyone's exposed equally. Doesn't matter. I mean, the pandemic hit. So the fact that I think of your 50 restaurants, I mean, it's a cross section of really the food industry in San Francisco, right?
Yeah, and I think even within the restaurants, though, it's always the people of color, the recent immigrants, who are the most severely affected. Like here in San Francisco, the neighborhoods even where we have a lot of transmission, a lot of infection, are the Mission, our Hunters Point, Bayview, where my business is located. But it's where you have people that are lower income for the most part, living in crowded conditions, and unfortunately, like, I don't know, even of the people who lost their jobs at my business, a lot of restaurant workers, everyone in the back of house side, a lot of people are sort of immigrants from other countries, and they can't apply for benefits, or they don't have health care if they lose their job. They don't necessarily have a group of family members here who can help support them. So, so they're definitely feeling the effects much more because they don't have a way to safely shelter in place. And a lot of times they're living in more crowded conditions with a bunch of people who sometimes aren't related to them. So you're just increasing the chances for infection within that group, unfortunately. So those are the people we're trying to sort of assist, both through employment and also directly through food assistance.
Really wonderful. Lenore, I know that in the audience tonight, we have both entrepreneurs from the private sector as well as social entrepreneurs in social impact. You straddled both. You've done well in both. How do you define yourself? Do you sense that the three babes that will continue, or do you feel that your passion is now on the social impact side? Do you feel that you're going back? How do you see your career at this point?
I think that I've kind of always considered myself someone who definitely cares about social impact. I mean, I think for me, I'm certainly much more passionate. I started my business because I was really passionate about food and environmental issues, and like kind of telling stories about farming. And very quickly, I became actually much more interested in the entrepreneurship and like employment side of things and issues around small business ownership. I've certainly always been interested in sort of community stewardship and citizenship stuff. And so what I would love with SF New Deal is to sort of have some like longer pathway into addressing the very terrible problems that face our society. I think really activating people to become more civically engaged, to work together to solve problems is what I'm really passionate about here. So I think my business will continue. We were about to open a new space actually right before the COVID shutdown happened. So it's now just an empty construction site, but we're hoping that the construction will start happening soon and we can open that space. But I do think that even pre-COVID, I was sort of interested in finding some way to work with other people in the community to solve challenges such as homelessness. Housing is a big issue here in the Bay Area. Hunger. So this is kind of in line with the kind of stuff I'm interested in, but it's my sort of first foray into doing this in a in a formal way. But it's been really fun. It's definitely been very inspirational. I think I've really enjoyed being on a fast growing team. Like my business of 26 people took me 9 years to build. And then the team for SF New Deal, I mean, we have 35 volunteers. And it seems like the team doubles every week, honestly. So it's really been like being part of a very fast growing company. And it's like a company that immediately has a huge budget and thousands of stakeholders and essentially 35 unpaid employees. So that's been really fun.
Really great to hear. One of the things that we're seeing is that, there are trends out there. One of them obviously is volunteer engagement. Another one is this whole surge toward entrepreneurship, especially entrepreneurship from some of those marginalized populations that have really been shut out of the mainstream economy, veterans, people of color, immigrants. But then the third big trend, and you're right on it right now, and that is the whole notion and the quest to fight inequality. And I think that what we're doing, and I think what this pandemic is exposing are the embedded inequities in our system. And hopefully we're going to be able to flush those out, identify them, and address them. The other thing is that we know that both millennials and the Gen Z generations, they really want to be part of companies that are committed to corporate social responsibility. And how do you see that? How do you see that in San Francisco? Do you feel that companies that are really committed to having social impact have a competitive edge in not only recruiting, but in retaining employees?
Gosh, I don't know about employee retention. I guess for us, we've gotten pretty good people considering that we're a small bakery. And I think a big part of that is just the excitement that a lot of people have to work with founders. So my co-founder and I have always been very much involved in the business. And so I do think it's been a big draw. We've gotten some just like awesome people from really great schools. And I think we're getting a lot of times an excellent pool considering that we're just a small bakery. And I do think that people are interested in sort of the sustainability, social justice, and how those things work together with food. Gosh, and I do think a lot of people have some interest in feeling a sense of meaning in their work. Like I certainly really yearned for that early on in my career. And I worked for Google, I worked for Blackstone, I worked for a lot of really good companies, but I certainly just felt like I kept like looking for that sense of meaning. And what I realized actually was that the sort of meaningful work that the company may or may not be doing for me kind of paled in comparison to how I felt I was using my personal skills. So at some point I just had to be like, all right, I keep bouncing around to different companies, hoping to find something that sticks. And perhaps instead I should just focus on the actual things I like doing day to day. And then when I tried I sort of narrowed down my potential career paths and chose entrepreneurship, and then realized that I definitely love entrepreneurship. Like that is clearly meant to be my thing. I think, gosh, I don't know. I think there is a tension because a lot of companies, I mean, all companies really have a CSR program, it seems like. But here in the Bay Area, at least, we see income inequality increasing. And so I think having an honest conversation about why that is, and actually holding ourselves accountable for getting involved to try to fix that, is really what needs to happen. And I think it's very easy to be like, well, the government should be fixing that. But the reality is, here in San Francisco, at least, that the government has spent hundreds of millions of dollars on homelessness, and the problem hasn't gotten better. And so I don't think it's sufficient to say either we're going to throw more money at the problem, or our elected officials should fix this because it's important to us. Really, if we have the political will here, we do have the resources, like both money and smart people, and the ability to sort of solve problems collectively. And even just, I don't know, for me, I'm only working on one problem here. I'm not trying to solve like all of them at once, but just with the feeding thing, I've seen us able to work like literally, at 1/10 the speed. The government's working at like 1/10 our speed. So we're working 10x faster than the government and achieving big things. And we're just random people, right? I'm like a random bakery owner. And within 1 week, I was able to start pumping out 20,000 meals with some friends who are willing to work for free. So, like I do have, Emmett sort of stepped up and was willing to help pay for it. But I guess what I'm saying is that resources are available to act really quickly, and we should have a different set of standards. Like our expectations are too low for what our government and each other are capable of.
Incredibly inspiring. One of the great, just turning back the dial a little bit, one of the great things that you mentioned was that how in your career quest, you decided that instead of doing all that searching, just really focus on what you're passionate about. Because so many people think that, success is linear, but it's very often nonlinear, and there's a lot of false starts, but then eventually you come home, so to speak, and then you're really following what rings true. I know there are going to be people out there, and how would you advise them that maybe they're doing their search, maybe they're thinking about an entrepreneurial idea versus taking a job in a company? Any advice for them? Because I know a lot of people, especially now, are facing those kinds of life decisions.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, well, I think that being an entrepreneur is a calling. My brother's an actor, and I see a lot of kind of parallels between being an entrepreneur and being an artist. There's a lot of sort of worries about struggles about how to spend your time. You know, should I do something that pays the bills now, but isn't that fulfilling? Or should I go for the really fulfilling thing, knowing that if it doesn't work out, I'm left with nothing? At least with entrepreneurship, you can kind of see if your business is working. Are you making money or not? But I do think you have to do it. Gary Rogers, I don't know if you know what that is. He was the person that built Dreyer's Ice Cream to be a huge company. And he passed away a few years ago, but for a while he was mentoring me, and he was a college rower. And so a lot of his kind of business analogies were always about rowing. And so one of them was, he was like, why do you think, you see those guys out there on the river rowing all year long, practicing? They don't have races most of the year. Why do you think they're doing that? And I was like, I really don't know, Gary. He was like, they love the workout. You got to love the workout. And I do think that's kind of true. You sort of have to love it. You have to love the workout. And so I certainly have a lot of friends who have just kind of like tossed around an idea, like an entrepreneurial idea, and especially with how successful some people have been in entrepreneurship, it's easy to sort of romanticize what the life is like. The reality is most people fail, and it's also very hard. And so just like with acting, you know, most people don't end up Brad Pitt. So you actually do have to love what you're doing, and like love the process of problem solving, and be inspired and engaged by trying to create something. And so if that's you, or you're thinking about it, I would say just try it. I mean, the reason I ended up launching a business was because I kind of narrowed down my choices, and I realized that starting a business was the only one where I could try it right away and just like know if I liked it or not. Previously, I'd been working 2 or 3 years at a number of jobs that I kind of realized after that time I didn't love, and I didn't want to continue with. And so rather than doing that, I just thought, okay, well, if I try starting a business, I'll definitely know immediately if it's not for me. And the opposite was true. I actually loved it. So even staying up all night, even not making any money for years, I loved the workout. And so that's what I would encourage you, if that is you, to definitely go for it sooner rather than later, because the younger you are, the less, the fewer obligations you have. And so you also just have more at-bats. If it fails 2 or 3 times, you could still try again. The longer you wait, the more obligations you have. And so then it can be really hard, because if you have real responsibilities like children or a mortgage or things like this, it can be, you're putting sort of other people's well-being on the line to pursue your dream, which can be hard. So if you're young and want to do it, I highly recommend just going for it.
Right. You know, and after all, you're not far from Silicon Valley, where they made popular that saying, fail and fail fast.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what you've done, it really reminds me of, you know, the old saying was ready, aim, fire.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like a lot of entrepreneurs, they fire, ready, and aim. They just really go for it. They fail, they make mistakes, they self-correct, but they keep going.
Yeah, that's just normal. I mean, I think part of what we've been doing with SF New Deal is, or part of something that I've kind of observed working with government here is, for government, even though people are very passionate about helping others in general, like incentives are really not aligned to solve problems quickly. And the reason for that is, if you take risk and then something goes wrong, you're in trouble. And then if something goes well, if miraculously nothing goes wrong, which is never going to happen, your boss's boss takes credit. So incentives are really not aligned to move quickly on anything. And all of the forces at play sort of center around just waiting longer until more things are apparent, so you won't get in trouble. That does not work for solving problems and moving quickly, right? Anyone who's ever launched a business knows that tons of things constantly go wrong. It's for years. I mean, it's just always, anytime you're trying to do something new, things go wrong, and all you can do is fix it, move away from the things that aren't working and lean into the things that are working. But you're never going to start out perfect. And you can wait forever to sort of try to get the perfect point to launch, and that day will never come. So, so the best thing you can do is just like get started and see if you can make something work. And so for us with this, I mean, we were kind of like, all right, we got this money, we're going to go for this. If it works and we have success, then we'll keep building on it. If it doesn't work, then the worst case scenario is we've spent $1 million feeding people and keeping businesses open for like 8 weeks. So, neither of those things are bad outcomes. And it just so happened that we did something that has legs. So now it's growing into something more.
So, I was reading about Three Babes Bakeshop, and I was dying to try some of that, either the blackberry crumble or the honey walnut pies.
Oh yeah, you can get this salty honey walnut can be shipped.
Are they still selling?
Yeah. You can you can order the nut pies to be shipped. The fruit pies you have to come to the Bay Area to get. Those don't ship so well because they're fresh fruit. So I don't know, putting them in the mail is a disaster.
Okay, I know we've got a lot of questions lined up. Grace, I'm wondering if we should now tee up some of the Q&A coming from the audience.
Sure, Ken, that sounds like a good plan. So our first question, thank you so much, first off, Lenore and Ken, for that very fascinating, illuminating conversation. And Lenore, thank you so much for everything that you're doing and leading in San Francisco. It's wonderful and powerful, and I think very inspiring for everybody listening. So our first question is from Leslie. How are you tracking and onboarding financial contributors, food providers, and recipients?
Yep. Okay. So 3 different systems. The restaurants who are signing up, typically they will write into our website or call, and then we'll sort of send them a form. They'll fill it out about what days they're open, what kinds of food they offer, a bunch of information about them. And then they'll have a phone call with us to just sort of talk to them about timeline or what their specific circumstances. And then kind of as new meals come up, we'll onboard people. We had almost 50 restaurants sort of were onboarded in the first 2 or 3 weeks. And so I guess one thing I haven't mentioned so far is as a food business owner, having predictability is really important. So I've certainly been in circumstances where my normal baseline amount of orders is like 40 pies a day or something. And then someone calls and wants to order 1,000 pies for 2 days from now. And so you're a struggling small business owner and you think, I really need this money. I'm just going to stay up all night for the next 2 nights and like make all the pies. And I don't really have time to hire people. You might call some people that used to work for you and see if they can come back, and maybe they can. But you're really not set up for success. And then you don't really know if you're going to get another order like that. So it doesn't make sense to employ people longer term, and it just creates chaos. And actually for us, this is kind of a trend that happens. We can predict that we're going to have tons of demand around Pi Day and Thanksgiving every single year. And so there are things we can do to meet those spikes. But over time, what we really need to do was sort of develop a model that is impervious to the spikes, and that doesn't require that additional spike in income to keep operating. So in launching this, there were already some organizations that were kind of providing one-off support, rotating through all the restaurants in San Francisco and ordering 300 meals from them once a month, but on a not very predictable basis. That doesn't help anybody stay employed, really. Like, we encourage all of our restaurants to sign up for as many programs like that as possible, just so they can make more money. But really, to know I can keep my 20 staff members, you have to sort of have some reliability on kind of the money you can expect over the course of the next several weeks. So for us, anybody that signed up with us, we wanted to be able to make a 10-week commitment to that we were going to provide just like a steady number of orders. The cost per meal is $10. So it's much less than many of these restaurants are making otherwise. For some of the restaurants, it's totally fine. For others, it's kind of a stretch to make it work for $10. Some of our chefs aren't even being paid themselves so that they can guarantee employment for their workers.
Wow.
But anyway, we sort of immediately brought on these 50 restaurants, and then we had this wait list of over 100 people. So of those, maybe one of those gets let on each week, but we just haven't had the funding to be able to sort of let everyone on. And then for the community partners, most of those come in through phone calls or referrals. We have a community organizer who's kind of our head of community. And he has, like 15 years of experience in the restaurant industry and has been like a big social justice leader here in San Francisco. So he's done a lot with police reform. And also he ran like someone's DA campaign very recently. He's very connected politically and in the restaurant and social justice space. So he just has a lot of, just so much knowledge and compassion. And so lots of stuff is coming into him. So he's like listening to people's stories and understanding like truly what their need is. And for some people that's grocery bags, for some people that's vouchers, and for some people that's meals. We're doing meals for people. So sometimes people call in and they have a need that we aren't the best suited to meet. And so Vinny will sort of find the other people who can provide and then very quickly make that connection. So one example is we had a group of kids who recently were released from a detention center, and they were living with sort of caretakers who aren't their parents, and they weren't able to access food through any of the existing food distribution programs through the school system. A lot of towns, New York included, I believe, Boston is another, are using schools as like the food distribution site for the community. And for some groups that works okay, and for other groups that really doesn't work. So a lot of times there's like a 2-hour window where you can go get food. But let's say you're a mom of 4 kids, you're a single mom, and you're trying to go every day to get meals. And also the meals are only available for the children in the family, not any elders, not you. And people are spending like a lot of time in line getting potentially like exposed to illness and a lot of other issues. And so anyway, part of what we're trying to do is we're bringing people meals to their homes directly, so they're not going outside. And so anyway, we had this group who was recently released from a detention center who needed food, and really what they needed were grocery bags, and they couldn't go to the schools and access food in that way. And so we sort of connected them within 24 hours with someone who could provide long-term support for them. So if we can't onboard someone, we have sort of a running wait list, and there we're ranking it by need. As I mentioned, we're working with 18 community organizations. So a group of Black pastors, we're working with UCSF with their Department of Psychiatry. They're servicing a bunch of SROs around the city. We're working with Rise SF, which is this recent immigrant group. We're working with some community centers that house people who are HIV positive. So it's a very broad cross-section of people in need. And so we're providing meals every single week for the same group. And then as possible, we sort of let people in off the wait list, and we're prioritizing people mostly based on need. So everyone on the list is in need, but some people have truly no sources of food otherwise. Some people are getting maybe like 3 meals a week from some other party. So they'd be lower on the wait list than someone who has zero access to food. And then I think the question was, how are we managing donations? So we have multiple ways the donations are coming in. We have a website where there is a Stripe. Stripe is our backend processor, and you can just make a donation online. For large foundation gifts or people giving from a donor advised fund, we're sort of working with them directly so they can send their wire through. And so we're keeping track of it that way, I guess. But the money is being immediately spent. Like one of the common questions is like, can you let me know when my money is spent? And it's like, it was just spent today. Like you put in the money and the check is being written tomorrow. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you, Lenore. And our next question is about fundraising. So Ed's question is asking if you can talk a little bit about your fundraising aspirations and plans. Are there community foundations you're able to target who offer COVID-19 relief funds?
Oh yeah, great question. It's been really hard to raise from foundations. The reason for that is because all of the nonprofits that already exist, most foundations have a relationship with a bunch of nonprofits they're supporting. And most of those nonprofits are kind of in trouble because their summer fundraising, the gala season is canceled. Whatever fundraising events they had for the rest of the year are canceled. And so a lot of the foundation support is actually just tied up in supporting existing relationships and keeping existing nonprofits from closing, which I think is a very worthy cause, and it's very important. We don't want our entire sort of charitable ecosystem to collapse because there's not enough money for payroll and for paying rent and stuff like that. But what that means is there's really not as much kind of corporate money or foundation money available to sort of new organizations. The other thing that we've seen happening is a lot of stuff is just about relationships. And so there are some larger organizations that are doing work nationally, like World Central Kitchen is one of them. And those are kind of sucking up a lot of the fundraising dollars from like the Salesforce Foundation, from Laureen Powell Jobs, from the Emerson Collective, from the Clinton Foundation. Like they already have these established relationships with World Central Kitchen. And so that's where all the money's going, but none of that money is really being spent in San Francisco. And so we're trying to meet the scene in San Francisco, but all the big companies that are in San Francisco are sort of committing their dollars to more global causes, which is a worthy strategy, but it's been hard. We have gotten some corporate support in terms of resources, actually. This is kind of cool, but Cruise Automation, which is a self-driving car company, they've actually given us a bunch of their vehicles to use for delivering meals, which has been awesome because it means it's a lot less kind of volunteer coordination in person that we have to do to get the meals out to people. So it's allowed us to scale up and be a lot more effective. But again, I do think a lot of companies are feeling sort of the strain of being worried about low stock prices, and also a lot of the kind of revenue around technology here in the Bay Area, at least, is around advertising. And I think advertising budgets are being like dramatically slashed. And so it's been really hard to access corporate money. So the best success we've actually had is with just generous individuals, and we haven't had that many large gifts. We've had a lot of like, $150 donations come in on the website, which is helpful. We've had a couple of $50K to $100K donations, and we're very actively working to try to sort of raise money, obviously. But I think it's hard. It's a very competitive landscape right now, and even getting to entities that were supposedly giving money 4 weeks ago, people were saying that their money was already committed.
Right.
San Francisco has a fund called the Give to SF Fund, which a lot of people are also choosing to give to, like a lot of the bigger players. Jack Dorsey gave a bunch there. Ron Conway, I think, committed a lot. Benioff gave a lot there. And that money's just not being spent yet, which has been really frustrating. It's been like allocated, but then it just hasn't been spent. And I think part of that just speaks to the city's, the city is crunched. They're losing
too, right?
Yeah. I mean, they're having budget shortfalls, right? And so they're kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. But yeah, at the beginning of this, when Emmett volunteered the money, I spoke to a good friend of mine who works in city government here, and she tried to convince me to give the money to Give to SF. And at that time, I was just kind of like, not a single dollar has flowed from Give to SF yet. And it's been, we're like weeks in, right? We've already been providing meals for 2 weeks. There's no money available to feed anyone that's not COVID positive. There's no way I'm giving you this money. I want to spend this money now to keep businesses from closing. And, now it's been 8 weeks and the money still has not actually been dispersed by and large. So, they'll spend it at some point, but my objective is to sort of like keep things going now, because the longer you wait, the sort of more desperate people become.
Absolutely. And that, I think, dovetails nicely with Allison Gardy's question and comment. Allison is a YANA board member, and she says, Lenore, kudos to you for your awareness of the urgency and the importance of timely financial assistance. What a difference your actions have made. Can you imagine if more people realized, as you do, how important it is to catch a crisis in the beginning to rescue people before their world collapses?
Yep. All of you can do it too. I think like the important thing is just to get involved where you live. Like, I really think that, unfortunately, like the government has this need to make sure that there is a fair and transparent process for everything and that they're accountable for everything. But the way they make that happen is like by creating these very bureaucratic hoops that people have to jump through to either access money or apply to be a provider. And what that means generally is just like the smaller players can't get in there. Like the RFQ, the request for qualification process here in San Francisco is sort of, we filled it out, but we had, a team of very smart people and even parents jumped in to help. But the average small restaurant just would never be able to meet those qualifications. So you have the situation where it's like only California Pizza Kitchen and Aramark are qualified to apply for this. So I do think like the reason we're able to work with smaller parties and make things happen really fast is because we have trust. We have a lot of people who have like intimate knowledge of the problems and the people involved, and we're working together like very actively to solve a problem. And I think anyone can do that. And it really takes a lot of the burden out of the bureaucratic process because you're able to move at the speed of trust. And so, you know, by having a community that's responsive and has relationships with each other and making decisions on that level, you can really like work quickly and make $1 out of 15 cents. So I would encourage all of you to find some way to get involved wherever you live in trying to like help make things better.
Right. And
you all have the capability of doing that.
if I can just piggyback on that, Lenore, the other thing that I just realized is, you know, there's that old saying that it's better to ask forgiveness than to beg permission. And you've just, you're able to break through the fear. I think fear is a lot that holds people back, but when you can just realize that, hey, you know, action can counter fear, and then you can keep self-correcting, you can just keep moving forward and have impact. And that's really what you've done. So hats off to you.
Thanks. It's, I don't know. I think it's like my tendency, right? That's probably why I'm an entrepreneur. But yeah, I think it's hard because I see how for the government, it's like anything goes wrong and like everyone's angry. And so, but what that means is then you just, the tendency is towards inaction. And that is not acceptable right now. Like there's just, we can't live like that.
Absolutely. So the next question is from Anne. Curious if you're having any supply chain issues, including access to kitchen facilities. Are you just using your existing kitchen facility?
So Three Babes is not a beneficiary of this at all. So like I'm not getting paid and my company is not participating in like supplying any meals, nor is Three Babes receiving any money. We've not had any supply chain issues so far. Basically, we're using an existing network of restaurants and their kitchens. And that's been amazing because it really it sort of removes like single points of failure. So here in San Francisco, for anyone that lives here, Glide Church and St. Anthony's are two major presences downtown that are in the Tenderloin that feed people who are homeless. And they're together providing around 32,000 meals a week out of their kitchens. This week, St. Anthony's actually had to shut down for several days because someone tested positive for COVID. And so there's a lot of fear around what's going to happen if like both of those kitchens go down at the same time, because they just provide so much of the support. And like, if anybody gets sick at either of those places, they have to shut down. So the positive thing about what we're doing is like there are 4,500 restaurants in San Francisco. 50 of them are currently active with us, and then we have over 100 people on our wait list. And so basically, if someone has to shut down for a week, we just can move, can just move the orders to someone else's business, and so it really like spreads out the risk more. In terms of like food supply, I know there have been a lot of stories about like farmers plowing their food under and, how COVID has resulted in waste. The reality is there's a lot of waste in our normal food system. I believe the statistic is 30% of produce doesn't make it off the farm, even in normal times. And so here in Northern California, at least, we have a strong network of like local family farms. And I've been in contact with many of them, I'd say several dozen. I actually proactively called a lot because I wanted to sort of learn about the food waste thing. But for smaller family farms, a lot of them have just been able to be really nimble and just pivot to offering farm boxes or like find other ways to get their produce out. I think for the people who've had the most problems are like very large producers who rely on co-packers. So the people packaging cottage cheese into tubs. If you have only plastic tubs from China that are for 10 gallons of cottage cheese, and then all of a sudden you're not selling to cafeterias anymore, you actually need to sell pint containers for families. That's where you have problems because it's not easy to find a solution to sort of break down that stuff into smaller containers and package it. But I think one pro of just investing in like your local farms, like shopping your local farmers market, is that food system is actually much more resilient to changes as they happen. And so we haven't had any sort of supply issues, even in terms of like proteins or I don't know, stuff like that I've heard in like the national news. I did talk to a friend of mine is the controller for like a multi-billion-dollar agricultural company, and they were doing fine too, but it was because they owned the entire means of production. So like if they're, they own 70% of the domestic pistachio market and like a huge portion of the national citrus market. And they were like, well, if the oranges are getting old, we just turn them into juice. We own the juice factory. So that's been going fine. But the places I've heard about real problems are dairy, fish, and people that grow like specialty microgreens for fancy restaurants. But actually, otherwise, I've heard it's pretty okay.
Great, thanks, Lenore. So one final question before I hand the mic back to Ken to ask his final question to you, Lenore. And this is a more general question about ways that you've used your Yale network to help support this wonderful project, what you'd suggest to other Yalees as a first step to get started in similar opportunities. And this is from Jerry Henry.
So my Yale network has been really important. My, let's see, well, the initial $1 million we used to start the organization was from my friend and Yale classmate, Hsieh. I think all 3 people on our board are from Yale. Also, actually, a Yale alumni from class of 1969, maybe 1970, I guess 1970. I go to a coffee group with a bunch of old people, and one of them, I think the way I got into the coffee group is one of them went to Yale and graduated in 1970. And so a lot of these people are in their 70s and 80s. They're super interesting. They're a bunch of current and former federal judges and their friends. And so anyway, one of them is this lawyer. And so he got me like an amazing pro bono lawyer from his firm. I definitely lean on the Yale network all the time. And I would recommend, I guess one of the best things for me about living in the Bay Area is we have this like incredibly strong network of friends. We have a ton of Yale people who have ended up here, many of whom are fellow entrepreneurs. And so I think just in terms of like people I relate to, it's a lot of other people who love entrepreneurship and solving problems. And so that's been a really positive thing for my life in general pre-COVID. And those are the same people I'm relying on for helping me solve problems or like get access to resources during this crisis. I guess I would recommend that everyone out there just think about ways that are tangential to you, at least, that you can sort of get involved and assist in helping someone have like a slightly better life. And I mean, I think during COVID times, there are kind of a lot of ways to get involved. But for me, it's been my pleasure to be of service. It's really been like so inspirational. And I think actually I spent New Year's with a group of Yale people, and Emmett was one of them. And I remember when I was reflecting about what I wanted for this year, I was saying that I was feeling like I really wanted to do something like big and important that had an impact on people. And I feel really excited that I've been able to kind of do that. I mean, it's unfortunate that it's in this way, I guess, but yeah, like an opportunity presented itself for us to work together to make this happen. And I feel so lucky for that.
Incredible. Ken, did you want to have a last question for Lenore before we wrap up?
Sure. And then Grace, thank you as well for putting this together, for introducing Lenore to all of us. It's just been an incredible gift. And also you gave me a reason to wear a dress shirt for the first time in 8 weeks. So thank you. Lenore, I gotta just in wrapping up, the pandemic has been such a downer for all of us. You're so optimistic, you're so upbeat. Give us something optimistic and uplifting and something great that you think will come out of this that we can look forward to.
Okay, well, I think this is actually a great opportunity to sort of like address longer term a lot of problems that have been dogging our society forever. And so here in the Bay Area, one example is housing. It's been really hard to build more housing. We have a very bureaucratic planning process, and all the meetings to hear about whether you should build or not are like at 1 p.m. on a Thursday. So no one can attend those. But now during COVID, they're doing everything online on Zoom. And so I was talking to a group of people here, the YIMBY group, that are trying to sort of get more housing built. And they were saying, we've had like 10x the turnout it used to be that only 3 people could show up because they have jobs, but now everybody can show up online to these planning commission meetings. And so now we're actually able to show all the support there is for building more housing. And we'd love to just continue this. Like we should always have online meetings after this because like, look at the participation we're getting. Similarly, like with the work I'm doing, I mean, two things. Number one, I think this is the chance for us to sort of come together and really understand hunger. I think if like the long term, we'd really like to solve food insecurity, and we should be able to do that. We should be able to use like a lot more technology to sort of understand what the need is and understand the distribution of resources. And it's really unconscionable that we haven't moved to a system that takes advantage of technology to assist us with this. Like, I don't know, the government is really like in the Stone Ages in terms of sort of what they're doing to like effectively administer support. And so I think that like this is a chance for us to sort of all work together to reform that system. And I think on the small business side, actually, a lot of people have been operating in a kind of unsustainable way for years. And so some of the work I'm trying to do with with the restaurants who are participating with us is sort of, you know, both helping them meet the spike in need that they're having right now by providing financial assistance, but also kind of working with people to create a system that's actually going to be sustainable long term. And that takes a long time. I mean, that's going to be a year or years long process for these businesses. But you know, using this moment to make the investments and things that are going to sort of make a better future for everyone is what we can all be working on. So I just encourage everyone to think about what could be better about the community where you live, and trying to get involved in ways to make that happen, because there will be a lot of spaces to create a new system.
Well said, beautifully said. Thank you. Grace, thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you.
And, you know, in closing, I wanted to read something that Victoria sent to us in the chat, which I think is very beautiful and, you know, articulate. And she said, "The world we want is the world we build now. It's really inspiring that you are actually shaping the entrepreneurial business culture and addressing societal problems by leveraging resources and matching them to needs in your own community." So I think
Thank you, Victoria. That's really nice.
And very true. And, you know, so a huge thank you to both you, Lenore, as well as to you, Ken. And a big thank you to everyone for joining us, for submitting your questions, for your participation in tonight's webinar. A recording of this will be posted on the Accelerate Yale and YANA LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube channels. And we are looking forward to bringing you more virtual content in the coming weeks from both Accelerate Yale and YANA, and we hope you will continue to join us for those sessions. So big thank you to everyone, and hope you all have a great evening.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.